Hello, this is an update to the Solstice Gold investor presentation following on from meetings we held in Toronto in March with several of the larger investors plus market participants. It's designed to give investors and potential investors an update and to showcase where we think the project is headed over the next 6-12 months. Like all presentations, we make forward-looking statements. We encourage you to read them. So the investment thesis, and I guess by way of background, two principals of the company, Marty, Tunney, and myself, we spent over a year since our last endeavor at Newcastle Gold looking for the kind of projects we felt met key criteria for our investment and for potential investment of others in the hope of finding obviously a major gold deposit. We ended up choosing a large land position which ties on to Meliadine because it has size, it's in a safe political jurisdiction. Obviously, there's the evolving Agnico footprint in the region, which has really validated gold in the region. We wanted to be in Canada because of safety and because of political risk, and we wanted to be in a place that had high geological potential. And even though the market is clearly stressed, we think that the ongoing shortage of exploration assets means that's the place on the curve that we should be, the early part of the discovery curve, which is really where our company's expertise lies. So Solstice itself in May will be 1 year old with its listing on the Toronto Stock Exchange and Venture Exchange. We're focused exclusively on our project which ties on to the Meliadine claims in Nunavut, about 25 kilometers from the port of Rankin Inlet. As you'll see in the next few slides, we have a very strong shareholder base. There's some very well-known, savvy gold investors who, in our view, certainly in our position, we're here for the multiples that a success can bring, not a short-term gain. The management are co-owners of the company, significant owners. And importantly, we bought our stake at the same price as all other investors. In other words, there was no access to cheap management rounds for insiders. Treasury is currently 3.8 million Canadian. The company itself has the sole right to develop gold or any other metallic minerals on an extremely large 920 square kilometer property position in the safe and emerging jurisdiction, the safe and emerging belt that is Meliadine. And Meliadine is well documented to be hosted in large part by informations which are associated with major structures. We estimate that we control approximately 235 kilometers of newly recognized gold belts, which have the similar potential, in our view, to host gold deposits. Because of the work we did last year, which was set out to systematically for the first time evaluate the gold-bearing potential of these belts, we're now faced with very low property maintenance requirements on an ongoing basis. So we don't have any government-imposed assessment requirements which control our fate. Certainly in our core area, we're in well excess of 4 years before we have to consider spending any money. There are no underlying auction payments to vendors or purchase costs. The company is managed by a small but experienced and successful team on the ground. Our technical work is led by Ian Russell, VP Exploration, who has extensive experience covering many gold belts across Canada and also Northern Europe. As do I, and our focus is really on applying the highest level technical work possible with the help of third-party consultants to move the project forward. So this slide really just summarizes the management, myself and Marty, the two essential co-founders. We were approached by Chris Taylor and Bob Singh of Dunedin when Dunedin, the diamond explorer in the region, was starting to recognize gold potential in some of their sampling. And Chris and Bob and I spent many months, along with Marty, negotiating a deal which eventually led to the spin out of the gold assets. And a year later, this is where we are. We have a very small management team, 3 full-time employees, but very focused 100% on moving this company forward. And we're supplemented by various board members. You see Chris Taylor there, who remains on the board as a director, Mike Leskovic, who is well known in capital markets as VP of Northfield Capital, and Chad Ulansky, who was also a director of Dunedin and has been long associated with Chuck Fipke, who is one of the largest shareholders of Solstice. You can see in the top right the capital structure. Currently have about 69.5 million shares issued, and fully diluted cash would be 12 million. Existing cash is about 4, so you can see the dilutables, if they were in the money, would bring in an extra $8 million. The bottom right shows the key shareholders. You can see there Rob McEwen, obviously doesn't need any introduction to this market. Northfield Capital, also very, very well known. Phoenix Gold Fund, which is a fund based in Switzerland. The property vendors, management insiders, have a significant position of 5% rather. I personally hold about 2.5 million shares and have been continuing to buy in the market over the last year. The big piece of the pie at the top 10 shareholders and brokers, really relatively small number of hands own the 43% there. So essentially it's a fairly tightly controlled company. The other key significant shareholder there is Kevin Reed, who's currently at Max Capital for the longest time. Before that was a banker at GMP. Kevin and I have been associated with this business for 15 years. I've known him very well. He supported me and he supported Marty in our last endeavor at Newcastle Gold, and he has bought a significant portion of that, I think 7 million shares of his position in the market since listing. So we're left with a really tight group of savvy and well-motivated shareholders. We're all aligned. We've all bought shares at the same prices. And our goal is to continue to try and manage as best we can dilution as we move forward in the goal of discovering a major deposit. Okay, so moving on to the property location, we're adjacent to claims controlled by Agnico Eagle, shown in grey here. Our core claims, the 920 square kilometers, are the strong gold color there, and we have certain rights to acquire gold rights with permission from Dunedin on the adjacent sort of lighter yellow colored claims. But for now our focus is on the 920 square kilometers, denoted by the strong gold color. We sit about 20 odd kilometers from the port of Rankin Inlet, from which you can see a red line there, the mine road going up to Melludine. Also to our northeast is the hamlet of Chesterfield Inlet, and you can see a red line moving from Chesterfield and a dotted line heading towards Rankin, which is the road that's in progress to link the two communities for the first time of Chesterfield Inlet and Rankin. And that road would run right through the core of our property. The right hash mark pattern at the top right, you can see just west of Chesterfield and extending to part of our property are Chesterfield Inlet owned surface rights. We control the mining rights for all of the area in gold, and the area of most of our claims, which is underpinned by no hash marks whatsoever, denotes that it's crown land. And you can also see in blue on this slide the currently delineated Caribou Summer Core Range, which is off to the southwest of the project. As I mentioned previously, there's no underlying payments due on our claims, and we have many years in excess, based on the work we did last year, to prevent us having to be driven by assessment-driven requirements. The only encumbrance on the property is a 4% NSR to the original vendors, which can be brought down to 2% at any time for $4 million Canadian, any time prior to production. Shown on the map are stars. You can see the yellow stars. Those are the gold deposits of Melludine, and you can see they form an array off to the southeast, where there's other white stars, which are exploration targets and showings from the NUMIN, the government assessment database. And we'll look at that in the next couple of slides. They sit on the Pike Fault, which is a major structure which is associated with iron formations and locally contains the gold deposits. But one of our first clues as to what might be going on in the region, because historically it was sort of believed that much of the potential stopped at the Pike Fault. You can see up into the northeast a series of stars which sit well beyond the Pike Fault, and they sit right on adjacent to our property boundary. And they're our first clue that there's potential for gold well beyond the Pike Fault, and as we'll see in the next few slides, that potential is now clearly established to extend over much of our property. So just taking a step back before we get into the project data, let's look at the target type. Well, it's Meliodine type iron formation hosted gold deposit, obviously due to its proximity to one of those, which is part of a much larger class of deposits called the orogenic or mesothermal class of deposit. These can be very large. The largest known is the Homestake deposit, which is 41 million ounces. Other examples include Meadowbank and Musselwhite, many of which are in excess of 5 million ounces, including Meliodine, which is in excess of 5 million ounces. So they can present a very attractive target if you're in the right location, due to the potential continuity associated with well-developed, laterally extensive iron formations. And like most deposits, but in particular this class of deposit, the most significant feature is not just to have iron formations, because there are many areas of the world that have iron formation with no gold, is to be associated with first-order, regional scale, deep-seated structures or breaks. Examples in Canada well known, like the Cadillac Malartic break, for instance. And these regional structures are often developed at volcanic sedimentary boundaries, are associated with late collisional events, and gold itself is fairly late in the whole structural history of the evolution of these belts. And often there are second and third order faults which affect the structure and are perhaps the most important in localizing gold deposits. So a good portion of this presentation is to go through the evidence that we believe we are sitting right on top of one of these, right next to one of these major gold-bearing structures. Adding on a layer of Meliodine data, we know that Meliodine, as it's true actually of many of these deposits, can be very arsenopyrite rich. Many of the zones are associated with coarse arsenopyrite. It's not refractory. It's associated with sulfidized iron formation, but also can be hosted in sediments. Now, so shouldn't focus just on the iron formation or just on arsenopyrite bearing rocks. And they're clearly associated in the literature with splays and folds that are close to this regional Pike Fault. They have a complex structural history and a strong plunge control of the ore bodies. We would expect through our surface work and continuing work to see a strong plunge control on the orientation of mineralization on our project as well. We know that deposits of this type can respond to magnetics. Obviously, iron formations tend to be magnetic, and that gets picked up. But they also respond to electromagnetics, because we're looking for potentially sulfidization or the addition of sulfides to pristine iron formations, which are associated with the gold-bearing portions of these iron formations. So at our project, we have very extensive magnetic and EM databases, which we acquired through the spin-out of the assets from Dunedin. And these form a very important and expensive, potentially expensive to replace, component of data. The next slide just kind of shows, I think, the advantage of being in an evolving gold belt. It would be unusual, it's not for sure that there are more deposits here, but it'd be unusual if Meliodine and the association of Meliodine deposits were the only ones in the district. And if we did some comparison work with some of the well-existing camps and used some of the sort of statistical methodologies that have been applied to camps, we would estimate that there's potentially 19 to 26 million ounces more to be found at Meliodine. That's the advantage of being in an evolving camp as opposed to a camp which is nearing the end of its cycle. And that's one of the attractions for us being in the Meliodine district. It doesn't mean, of course, those ounces have to be there, and it doesn't mean they have to be on our ground, but it gives us a very strong base from which to operate, and a strong probability that those ounces can be found. So we're looking here at the magnetic signature of the whole region. The Solstice claims are denoted by the yellow boundary. The dotted stipple are the claims on which we have potential option rights from Dunedin, subject to agreement. And the green pattern are Agnico control claims with a green outline. And we're looking at total field magnetics here. So the stronger the color, the more magnetism are in the rocks, and typically in many places that means that there's iron formation in these rocks. The data from outside our property is exclusively from either assessment reports or from the government data sets. So it's a slightly different quality, and the data that underlies our claims are from two separate surveys, the most detailed of which was 30 meter space. So it's very high detail, high quality magnetic product. And you can see some of the texture here. If you look to the southwest of the slide, the melodine deposits, the red stars, are associated with a belt of enriched iron. In detail in various products of the literature, we can see that those are associated with specific iron formations which splay off a major fault which hosts iron formations, and the splays themselves are in part hosted by iron formation. Similarly, up to the northeast, the gold showings that are documented historically, and these were mostly documented in 2005-06 by Comaplex, who were the precursors to Agnico. Agnico acquired the assets from Comaplex in 2010. The gold showings up at the northeast are associated with very highly magnetic rocks, which in detail are strongly interfolded series of iron formations. These iron formations are trending east-west, and they look like they want to trend, and we can see from various work on the ground, and we'll get into more detail later, that they want to trend into our property, as well as trending northwards across a major fold, which we call megafold. So there's a major bifurcation there of some of the rocks heading to the north on the megafold, some of them heading to the southeast, heading into our property. And you can see at the south part of the slide here, there's a major fold. We call it Westeros. It's delineated by very highly magnetic rocks, the southern limb of which are known to be associated with iron formation and locally gold showings. So we think that the same, from the magnetic patterns, the potential for the same geology to exist is very high. Looking at the geological compilation, and we've spliced here on the southwest of the slide data from public domain filed assessment work showing the locations in red of the known iron formations. Pink would be tonalites or granites. Green is mafic volcanics. Gray is sediment. And red, as I mentioned, are iron formations. And you can see now, we get a sense of the regional distribution of iron formations. And you can see, certainly at this stage, without superimposing our own data, the association between these iron formations and known gold showings, and in Melodyne's case, the gold deposits themselves. You can see also that the iron formations fold around and are cored by the pink tonalitic bodies. And we can see by putting this data together, part of which is in the public domain and part of which is our own interpretation, that there's a coherent pattern of rocks which extends all the way from the west to the east of the slide, linking all of the major rock units. So in other words, we think we're in the same rocks, we think we've got the same iron formations, and that would mean that we should have potential for gold mineralization on our claims. If we add a structural component, there's extensive structures in the region, some very large faults which cut and form major subsidiary second order folds. And just adding finally the claim position to show what Solstice controls of the architecture in the region. So it looks like we've got the same geology which underpins Melodyne, and certainly is associated with the same geology that has the gold showings to the north of them. So we look back at, going back now to the magnetic signature and the gold showings, this is essentially what would have been known a few years ago. Especially last year, we went out and collected well over 3,000 samples, mostly boulders, which is characteristic of the exploration style and methodology in the region, but also in place, in situ, to see whether or not there's gold in these rocks, because obviously our first order objective last year was to assess the potential for gold over this large area and see if there were areas to focus in on as we move forward. So what we're showing here in the circles are gold in boulders or outcrop. If there's a black dot in the middle of the sample, it's in outcrop. And anything in yellow is over 1/4 gram, which would be certainly strongly anomalous regionally. Anything in red was over 1 gram, which would be more interest. Also, we're showing from the adjacent properties from filed assessment work as squares, the same data from the adjacent claims. So the first takeaway from this slide is that once we turn on this data, once we go out and do the work as we did to collect all of these samples over an extremely large area, we start to see that there's gold developed over a very large area as well. And the focus of that sampling has been to the southeast, also the eastern part of the slide, in the area we call QEMS, which we'll get into later. But we can see that there's points of light, there's gold showings all over the property, which hitherto were not known, and that's given us a lot of confidence that we're certainly looking at potential for gold mineralization over a wide area. And we can see that adjacent claims are lighting up as well. So essentially we're looking now at the beginnings of the district expression of a gold signature versus 3 or 4 years ago, where there would just be 2 areas apparently separated by nothing. Definitely not the case anymore. Some of the highlighted samples here, just the arrows pointing to some of the specific numbers, just showing that there can be specific grade amongst these samples. The yellow symbols, or the yellow outline to the symbols, are Solstice samples, and the one with the orange outline were actually collected by RPA, who were up there last year doing due diligence with us, and will be ultimately authoring the updated technical report when we complete one. So ourselves and a third party have collected some very significant showings, and you can see that these can be multiple ounces, up to 66 grams. Most of these are boulders, but there are locations where they're in situ. The 8.82 grams, which is sitting over on the right side of the slide, the 24 grams well up to the northwest on the north limb of the megafold. Both of these are in situ, and there are other examples also. We can also see that gold's extending down the southern limb of the Westeros fold. So there's a very widespread expression of gold, the focus of which is where the cluster of samples are, which is where most of our work is now focused in on. So this slide shows those key areas. We call it megafold, northwest limb, northwest Ross, southwest Ross, and what we call a QEMS, which is just an acronym for a number of sub-target areas. We're going to focus in mostly for the rest of the talk here on the QEMS area. So this is the QEMS area, the northwest quadrant of the slide with the green lens are Agnico control claims, and we're showing again the rock sampling in the same grade distribution as we previously described. We've added here in the circle pattern of symbol the known gold exploration drilling on both properties. The most significant is on the Agnico claims by Comaplex in 2006, the precursor to Agnico. So if we're to look up in the northwest part of the area, ACPIC, 8 holes, 1,136 meters, including a couple of key intercepts, 9.6 grams over 3.2 meters and 8.6 grams over 3.2 meters. Just for reference, Meliadine itself has an average grade of about 7.2 grams. So these are economically significant intercepts, all drilled on separate sections, so very difficult to kind of understand whether there's any vertical or lateral continuity to those, but certainly an area that, if they were on our claims, we'd be pretty pleased to have and follow up on. It just shows with a small amount of drilling that this area has the potential to host economically significant intercepts. Further to the southeast, in an area called Aklak, some 5 wide-spaced holes following up on relatively significant surface sampling, some very high-grade surface samples, failed really to document those in drill core, which I think probably would remain a puzzle, but did indicate that they hit anomalous gold, 3 grams in the drilling there. I think, again, if those were on our claims, we'd probably consider doing more follow-up, given the tenor of the gold on the surface. But for us, the key factor is that the host to these showings, and I'll show them in sketches here. This is the iron formations, the high grade, the high colors here. They're heading into our property. They're heading both to the southwest in this area here, and they're heading eastwards into this area here. latter one we call megafold, and the area here we call basically enterprise, which we'll get into in detail. But that geology is both documented from the Agnico side and clearly documents significant gold, is heading incontrovertibly into our property. So the question is, where does it go? In 2005-2006, Kahuna had a gold exploration agreement with Sheer Diamonds, who had the diamond rights, and Kahuna did a very small amount of drilling. It's possible that some of these holes were actually diamond holes, which were subsequently sampled for gold. And you can see from the box on the left, total meters of 650 meters, about 2.4 square kilometers were covered or attempted to be covered by a relatively small number of holes. And of the 8 holes drilled, 5 missed their target, so they were misplaced for one reason or another. 4 did hit gold and iron formation. And they give us an intriguing glimpse into the potential, since they certainly haven't been, this area has not been drilled systematically. So if we look at the first one of these, KFC 001. First hole's drilled in Greywacke, it misses its target. The second hole's drilled for 45.1 meters, right in here. And it hits iron formation throughout its entire length. It has visible gold. Its best intercept is relatively narrow, but 7 grams over 0.62 meters. And the hole is lost due to technical reason at 45.1 meters. And for whatever reason, we don't know, it was never re-drilled. Certainly, typically, if you had a hole with gold in it that was lost for technical reasons, the normal process would be to follow up with another drill hole, but it wasn't. So there's a hole that's hitting the right target rock. It's hit some gold. We don't know how thick that iron formation sequence is there, and certainly from our perspective it wouldn't be a priority target for us to drill, but it's told us that there's the right rocks and there's gold in those rocks. And that pattern kind of repeats itself throughout the area here. I'm not going to go through each one of these holes, it's sort of listed on this slide, but many of them missed their target. Of those that did hit their target, they hit iron formation, they had some gold in them, and very little of this was followed up on. So for us, the bottom line is that very sparse sort of drilling that hasn't been followed up on has documented the right rocks with gold in them. So going forward, we've showing those as the diamond symbols, and we'll retain the circle symbols off to the northwest for the Agnico claims. So for instance, here's with showing the same annotation. Anything with significant gold in it, the drill hole would be red. Anything with 1/4 gram to a gram would be yellow, and holes which do not have gold in them, just still showing as the white symbol there. So looking now at the QEMS area, this is total mag intensity. So this is just basically the straight reading of the magnetics. The higher the color, the more magnetism, more magnetite usually, but sometimes pyrrhotite is in the rocks. Again, we can see from the left side of the slide, up in the Agnico controlled area, the association between the gold showings and iron formation. We can see that iron formation is heading eastwards. One of our key areas of interest to us is this megafold nose, where there's obviously the continuation of the same units, but an over thickened area where there's extremely high mag. We'd expect the fold to repeat itself, to repeat the iron formations. Given that we know that some of these high magnetic rocks contain significant gold occurrences, especially Akpik off to the northwest, megafold forms a very obvious target for us. As we'll see in the next couple of slides, it's covered by blanket till, so there's not much we can really do on the ground, but we've got mag and EM, which we'll move forward to developing drill targets on, and this comprises a certainly 1 to 2 kilometer long high priority target for us. In the area of what we call Enterprise Lake, we can see that on this map the magnetics are somewhat subdued. We can infer that there's units coming down and they're probably the same unit, and we have other data which we'll show you shortly to sort of confirm that. But essentially, much of the magnetics in this region are actually subdued. They're mag low. And it's of interest to us what this mag-low could mean. The mag-low here is being shown as the dotted white line, and it defines the area which we would expect the magnetics from the west and from to the east and to the north and to the southwest to be reproduced, but for some reason they're not. We go through a sequence of arguments really to understand why what could be causing that. Could it be that there's a problem with the magnetic survey? Well, we have two separate magnetic surveys of different eras, and they both show the mag-low. So the mag-low is certainly nothing to do with instrumental problems. Could it be related to overburden? There's a lake there, obviously. As we'll show you, we can see with various magnetic and electromagnetic techniques, see clearly into and through that lake. So we don't think that's the cause either. So this is a study that was done by Shear Diamonds in 2004, because to the southeast of here, they found some diamondiferous kimberlites. So they did a fair amount of detailed till work. And what we're showing here with the gray pattern are the distribution of blanket tills. So these are regional tills, glacial fluvial deposits, which are essentially covering the rocks below. And the area between them have sometimes outcrop or relatively thin tills, as denoted by the text there. And it's interesting that when we look at the distribution of our data, we can see that the vast majority of samples are conforming to this area of thin to no till. But as soon as we get into the blanket till areas, we start to see less and less, still some, but less and less gold showings. And if the gold is known, it's often from the fact that there's these sparse drill holes from previous work. So the takeaway there is that the fact that there aren't yellow and red dots in this area doesn't mean that there's no gold in this area. It means that it's covered by blanket till. And in fact, the few data points that we do have by virtue of the Kamenak drilling suggest that there is gold-bearing rocks in this area. So we would, it's essentially a false negative to imply that all of these gold showings that are coming from the west, both on our ground and on Agnico's grounds, are all of a sudden not going to be developed as we move eastwards. If we look at the second vertical derivative magnetic product, we can now start to see some architecture, some texture in the magnetics. I'm still showing the blanket tills here, but what you can see is very detailed magnetic units that are coming in. They're going to get folded around megafold. There's mag-lows that are developed. We can see a lot more texture, which is classically why we move to the second vertical derivative. Now we can't do that on the Agnico ground because we don't have virtue of access to the data over that ground, but we'd expect the data to resolve itself the same way if we did have access to that information. What we can also see under Enterprise is you can see that the mag trends are disturbed, but they are visible. For instance, we can see linear trends coming down. We can see units that we would correlate with the Agnico area. And then we can see the mag heading off in its normal sort of regional southeastward trend as we move eastwards and out of this area of the magnetic low. So the first point to make here is that when we look at the second vertical derivative magnetics, we can see very clear magnetic patterns. So we're not being blanketed by the blanket till. In other words, the till isn't obscuring the mag high. We can also see some other magnetic features which are extending westwards. These turn out to be iron formations which we discovered late last season in the Kaitak area, which are gold bearing and which will form an important area for us to follow up on next year or this year. So we take away the blanket till, we can see the very clear magnetic patterns and high quality data. This is 30-meter gridding, so 15-meter gridding, so it's 30-meter flight lines, so it's very high quality magnetic data, and we can see that there is general continuity of the mag trends from Agnico coming through our claims and heading out, but in the area of the mag low, there's a lot of disturbance going on. And it's interesting to us as to what might be causing that and whether that's something we should be focusing in on. This is part of our EM database, which we're currently in the process of reprocessing with the original survey company, which is CCG, previously Fugro. And as we mentioned earlier on in this presentation, EM is looking for sulfides. This is a quadrature response, so this would be low amounts of sulfides, but you can see that the trends, the warm colors, are forming very clear continuous trends. So for instance, there's a quadrature anomaly here, very strong one. There's a little bit at the megafold suggesting the sulfides present. There's structures which are extending through the Enterprise Lake area, which give us the confidence that again we're seeing through the till, but also that we've got EM techniques here which can see sulfides. And given that we only need 4, 6, 7% sulfides to potentially be associated with gold deposits, we're very interested in developing as much as we can our EM database. And we see that some of the channels were very noisy and needed leveling. We're currently doing that right now. But we can see that EM plus magnetics are going to give us a very good architecture on which to base go-ahead work. But again, this mag low, which we're showing in the white outline here, we can see through it. We can see through it with EM, relatively high frequency EM or moderate frequency EM. So it's telling us that the till is not itself posing any problems. So it's not the cause. So that raises the question of what could the mag low be? First of all, we know it's real. It preserves the trends through it. It's approximately 10 square kilometers in extent. Information packages from adjacent claims in all directions do show mag highs, which can in fact be gold bearing, so we certainly want to focus on those as well. And we know that where there's limited work within the mag low, the correct host rocks, i.e. information, are there, and some of them are gold bearing. That leads us to the conclusion that the potential cause for the mag low could be related to the development of grunerite and associated minerals, which are iron-bearing minerals, but they tend to be non-magnetic, and they're formed as part of the alteration that the rocks underwent associated with the gold mineralization. So to put it very simply, you take magnetite plus quartz plus a fluid, and you convert it to grunerite plus fluid, and this is documented from Meliadine with that source reference there. And it's noted that at Meliadine that the presence of grunerite is associated with the mineralized ore deposits. So in our own claims, we can look at some of the sparse data from the previous drilling, but it notes in one of the drill holes, 479-1, lower overall mag susceptibility in their hole compared to typical oxide-rich BIF, presumably due to the increased grunerite content at the expense of magnetite. So that's from their drill log. So it's essentially confirming totally independently of us that that same potential mineral reaction is taking place to reduce the magnetic signature of the rocks in and around areas which are containing gold. One of the other drill holes also notes that grunerite is a dominant mineral, that the hole has low magnetic susceptibility, and also notes that actinolite replaces grunerite near the gold enriched areas. So just some other lower grade alteration minerals, which again we can correlate with descriptions from elsewhere in the region. And finally, our own thin section work from Kaituk, which is the photograph on the right, that's a photograph of a thin section of a rock, notes that grunerite is developed, it's labeled there as GR, and it's altering to a lower grade metamorphic mineral called actinolytic hornblende in and around garnet. So we see ourselves, plus through the Kahuna work, independent confirmation that the kind of mineral reactions which can take a magnetic rock and make it less magnetic, and which are associated with gold mineralization at Meliadine, are active in our area, specifically and importantly in this area of the very large mag low. So that leads us to our geological compilation here, which is what we're showing here. And all the red units are iron formation. And you can see there's many of them, and they're starting out on the Agnico side of the fence. There's two major blue zones delineated here. One's called the Raptor Westeros, another one is an unnamed splay from the Raptor Westeros fault zone. The Raptor fault zone we know extends for at least 80 kilometers. We know it looks like it pins right down to the upper mantle, so it's a major first order structure one of these key breaks which can be associated with significant deposits. And we've plotted here also the gold data. And I think the main takeaway from this slide is if we look at the orientation of the units, so let's see if we can follow one coming in here. Here's a unit coming in. It takes a bend. It turns roughly through about 30 degrees. Here's another one, turns through about 30 degrees and starts to head down to the southeast and then reverts back to its regional trend direction. So there's a kink or a jog in this system which occurs between these two major blue structures, the major shear zones that are traversing through this part of the area. So we think that the orientation of the geology, the orientation of structures is not coincidental in the area of the mag low. It's specifically where the mag low is. We see a bend in the geology and we see potential ramping structures which are linking between the Raptor fault zone and the fault zone to the south, which may well have been the site of a lot of structural and hydrothermal alteration leading to the development. This is what typically the prospecting revolves around in this region. There's a relatively sparse outcrop unless we get up to the northwest. In the southeast, we can see an example of an outcrop, and you can see at a very small scale how folded that iron formation is, and we would expect that pattern to repeat itself on all scales. So the scale of the last slide is sort of representing a major fold repeats of one or perhaps two maximum individual iron formation units. Here we see some boulders as well on these slides, showing that the angularity, the size of them, the actual number of them, number of red arrows pointing to them there, suggests that these things haven't come from very far. So when we look at the mag, we look at the EM, we look at the mag low, we look at the geological interpretation, and we look at what we see on the ground, it's pointing us to the fact that that mag low is potentially the nexus, the core of a very large target, a structurally controlled target, around which we would expect to spend a lot of time following up and hopefully see more of this kind of stuff. The slide in the bottom middle shows some very coarse arsenopyrite, the bladed mineral, this sort of straw-colored guy here. This is grunerite. Here's some garnet. Here's the arsenopyrite. These are the kind of mineralogies that we would expect. And again, we're starting to see examples. This rock wouldn't be terribly magnetic. There's a little bit of magnetite in it, but this grunerite here is non-magnetic. And that's the kind of alteration that's associated. This would be very high-grade gold, given the amount of arseno in it. This is a type of alteration that we would expect to see associated with gold mineralization. So putting that together into essentially a model here, the backdrop is still the geology. You can see the red iron formations, you can see the trends, the dotted black lines there are showing this alteration. The strain ellipses, the main stress directions that the rocks have been subject to, go through rotation, and we see an area of flexure and warping of stratigraphy, and here's our mag low essentially sitting in this area here. And this forms our main target. So it forms and has many of the components that we would be predicting from the literature from major world-class deposits of the orogenic type. So moving now to some of the target areas, this is these boxes are individual target areas. Some of these are drill ready, some of which we'll need to do some more work on. We're going to go through these. First of all, we'll look at megafold and grizzly, focusing in on those. This is the megafold target, now looking at a second vertical derivative mag base. And the circles on that mag base are EM anomalies. So the more circles or the darker the circles, there'll be 4 frequencies responding, and so on and so forth. So we're able to show as an overlay here the EM response, i.e. the potential sulfide response over some of these magnetic targets. Megafold is about 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers long. This is megafold here, and you can see the EM anomalies, core of them here, more than 1 kilometer long. These would compare very favorably with some of the targets in the region, which we know are associated with mineral deposits, for example, at Amaroq, which is a agnico-controlled deposit, owned deposit. So the geology is coming. You can see from the west side of the slide, there's a whole number of parallel iron formations. they're going to get folded around this megafold nose, and the objective would be to drill across that with a sequence of holes to test the very attractive structural setting over thickened fold nose where there's an EM anomaly. To the south of there, the Grizzly target is part of a major fault. It's shown in a dotted white line here, but this is the area where the conductivity is increased. So it's a relatively short strike length part of that major fault, which extends all the way to the west on the Agnico claims, which looks like it's got sulfides developed with it. Both of these are till covered. Both of these would be viable drill targets. And you can see up in the top left, we're showing the inset there of, that's the megafold in location wise in the QEMS, but also showing it in total mag intensity. So this is definitely a drill ready target for us. And given the analogy of the data to the west, where high magnetic rocks certainly have economically significant intercepts in them, this is a high priority target for us. Moving down to the South Enterprise Lake area. So we're focused in here looking at the second vertical derivative mag at the South Enterprise target. The slide on the left shows where we are regionally in terms of we're right at the south end of the mag low, and the sort of anomaly in terms of magnetics we're interested in trends east-west through here, may repeat itself to the north limb here. And you can see there are a few drill holes. We know that 50651 was a kimberlite hole to the south, not relevant. 6, 7, 1, and 2 appear to be positioned to have tested this. So obviously what we want to know is, did they adequately test it, i.e. is it worth us redoing it, or did they not adequately test it, in which case it remains to be a valid target. Just looking at the EM response of this area, it's very strong response on all channels. This is the lowest frequency, 400 Hertz apparent resistivity. You can see very large anomaly. Here at 6200 Hertz, again, very large anomaly. And now in the quadrature response, we can see 3300 Hertz here, a little bit more continuity, so it looks like potentially there's a structure, could be folded, and the core of it sitting to the south of those two drill holes. So a very attractive EM anomaly, is very significant strike length when we unfold it, well over 1 kilometer. So we'll take a look at whether these holes tested it or not. We need to look at whether or not the drilling has adequately tested it. So looking at the first hole that's drilled on at 467.1, the top part of this slide is the profile. We're looking west, so north is to the right of the slide. The top part of this slide are the profiles of the EM and the magnetics through the anomaly. So we can see these peaks here, this area of these peaks, these are all the relatively frequencies, including the magnetics. We drop that down onto section. This is where we'd expect the area to be outcropping. And so this hole, this is the hole, we have these holes, we have the core, we have the logs, we have the data. This hole was plotted in its location. So the interpretation was that this unit was going to be dipping to the north, and that the hole should have intersected it somewhere along its length. It didn't intersect anything. It didn't intersect magnetic rocks. It didn't intersect anything to explain the EM. So we have to conclude that that hole missed its target. So in other words, the anomaly's not been tested, and it probably dips in the opposite direction. Looking, so they drilled another hole off to the east, a couple of hundred meters to the east, again to test this anomaly. The anomaly is a little more complicated on this section, but essentially this is where the anomaly sits. And there's a weaker anomaly sitting off to the south. But the main anomaly sits in the location shown here, so it's would outcrop here. Could not have been tested by 467.2. 467.2 is shown. It does look like it hit this iron formation here, which has a couple of grams of gold in it in a couple of locations, but it's arguable whether or not it hit the EM anomalies, which are shown in this location. One of the other key elements we've got is we've got the core, we've put it in the correct location here, and it's not exactly in the right orientation of the core box, but essentially it's telling you that the rocks are dipping close to vertical in this location. That banding gives us the orientation of the holes. So it's quite possible that there's strong folding going on here, so we could see that the magnetic intercept is explained by this, and essentially we've got some vertical going on, but the majority of the hole is telling us that it's dipping steeply, and it's probably dipping south, which is why the first hole missed it, and the majority of the anomaly was not tested. But where it did test the fringes, it hit iron formation, hit some gold. So for us, that means that anomaly is still wide open. It's well over 1 kilometer in unfolded strike length, and it's something we'll definitely follow up. Finally, moving to the Kaituk targets, which is a group of targets here. So these were discovered by Ian and his team 7 days before the snow flew at the end of last season, 2018. And a lot of focus was on sampling. There was some outcrop locations, but essentially this is a work in progress. And from that work done to date, over about 7 days, we can see gold in situ. There's gold associated with iron formation. There's the right kind of mineralogies, and there's a very large and two separate areas really of obvious potential. One clustering down in the south, and one associated with these known iron formations, which probably tie in to the mag low in this area here. So Kaituk is a work in progress, and the plan will be in June, as soon as the snow's off the ground, to continue the work on those, to map them in. Given that relatively little work to date has located gold-bearing rocks in situ, in outcrop, there's a reasonable probability, a high probability, that we'll see more gold in outcrop. The objective will be to see how extensive that is, and to document that, and also to take sufficient surface measurements to understand the structural controls in the area and the plunges. And once that work's done, we'll be able to incorporate that into our targeting. So we have two obvious targets here, drill ready. We have one down in the south, which is drill ready, although it's partially lake covered, so probably best drilled if there's ice. And then we have these targets here at Kaituk, which we're going to move forward, and we have high expectations and hopes for additional gold discoveries as we map those in. And it's worth pointing out that boots on the ground and mapping and sampling and recording the data, not only is it a vital step before you go drilling with the expensive drill machine, but it's low cost in relation, and it allows us to cover a large area. We're still looking there at something east to west, something like 8 kilometers or so from east to west in the Kaituk area. So this is a large area to cover. Our objective is going to be to gather as much data as we can, and from there make the decision as to which areas warrant the most attention from a drill perspective. Looking at these Kaituk areas, you can see, just focusing in, this is the kind of tenor of gold showings we're seeing. We're again looking at EM as the base here, and the EM's picking out some of the geometry of the units. And we can put on the iron formations and the major structures, and we can see there's a relatively good correlation between the known iron formations or interpreted iron formations and the distribution of sulfide-bearing rocks as detected by this EM survey here. And in certain areas, like here, there's iron formation in outcrop. There's 5.5 grams in iron formation in outcrop. Over here, we know that this drill hole was 45 meters and stopped in iron formation with 7 grams in it. We know this guy's got iron formation in the drill hole with gold in it. So we have pretty good sense, even though it's relatively early days in terms of Kaituk, that there's going to be more gold in situ. And the objective, of course, is going to be prospect along these units and these fold noses in particular, to see if we can document more gold, document the controls, give us something to follow up on. So to summarize, the work to date has been very successful to identify widespread gold over a broad area in a setting which we think has all of the ingredients for a potentially large gold deposit. Some are drill ready, whereas Kaituk, which is the area of most known gold, requires detailed follow-up. We can see that Kaituk lies adjacent to a very large magnetic low, which is covered by blanket till, and perhaps that area of the magnetic low is the highest priority target, but certainly Kaitak itself is a priority target based on the amount of gold we've seen to date. And as stated, relatively low cost, high quality technical work we believe can add significant value to avoid prospecting with the drill, which can be high risk and high cost. So we're currently incorporating reprocessing EM to refine targets. We expect that work to be done mid to late April. As soon as the snow's off the ground, we'll be mapping and sampling Kaitak and other areas in the early summer of 2019, and to target on expanding and understanding the gold system in this area, incorporate those results into a targeting setup for drill program, and think about whether or not we need to do that over 2 phases to essentially make sure we can test under the untested Enterprise Lake target area. So to summarize, we think this is really an unequaled access to a large land position in a safe jurisdiction next to a major deposit, on which we're demonstrating the presence of widespread gold, and we're starting to see some of the underlying structures and environment as being very attractive for the potential formation of a large gold deposit. As I mentioned, it's a safe area, Nunavut, an evolving area with strong support regionally for responsible development. We have a technically skilled and successful exploration team, a very strong shareholder base with people that understand the discovery process, and a work program that allows us to rapidly expand on a late season discovery in 2018 and work towards moving into the drill phase. So thank you for your attention to this presentation. Hopefully you've seen the kind of work that the team has done. It is a team approach here led by Ian on the ground, supported by the local communities, many of which we try and employ on the project, supported of course by our shareholders, and we thank them for their support and continuing support as we move forward. It's been an exciting short journey in 2018, and we think this project holds a lot of potential 2019 and beyond. So thank you.